Hello and welcome to another Kniche installment. As you can see today, we'll be looking at the HSC topic of operations and the subtopic within that is processes and the transformation process. As you can see, the definition of transformation is the conversion of inputs, so resources, into outputs, so goods or services. As you'll see from the flowchart below, transformation is in that middle part of that flowchart that leads to the output eventually. Now, the first thing that we need to look at is the influence of volume on the transformation process. Volume refers to how much of a product is needed to be produced. So the more that they can produce using the same production processes will often mean greater cost savings. So a reduction in expenses means that extra, profit can be kept, or that saving can be passed on to the consumer to achieve, price penetration, undercut the competition, therefore maybe gaining a competitive advantage. As you can see, an example of this is a baker. So a baker within an example like an oven like this, with the same, they're going to be baking their bread in this anyway. So they can either make one loaf of bread in that or 12 loaves. So if it's going to be put on, you may as well make the most of it. So what they have to figure out is supply and demand. So is it worth putting on a whole oven full of loaves if it's not going to be eaten? Whereas maybe they only want to put on 6 because that's all they're going to sell for that day. And our second influence is that of variety. The production process, it must be flexible enough to provide variety because it needs to meet the consumer's needs, even if it's a basic product. So for example, you see below a car manufacturer. They can use exactly the same process to produce their goods or their output with a basic model car, but with slight adaptations made. So in this example, we're looking at different colors. And our next process is the varieties in demand. Now, businesses have to be able to adapt to how many products or how many people want their service so that through the business life cycle, they can adjust accordingly. Now, in this regard, there must be adaptations built in so the businesses can easily adapt how much their output is. Because if there is a sudden drop in demand, they can scale back the process without incurring extra expenses. And also the flip side as well is if there is an increase in demand, they are able to meet that via their current structure or infrastructure. Now, in this regard here, if you have short lead times, the operations department must be able to meet changes. So the inflexibility could lead to wasted resources or delay in meeting customers' needs. In this regard, the case study that we have here is Carmen's. I'm a big fan of Carmen's and I actually buy this myself from Woolworths. And Carmen's actually got picked up by Woolworths and Coles. And in turn, the demand increased significantly. They started in Melbourne 20 years ago. They were making muesli and they were selling small quantities of it first. Now this, with the change in consumer tastes and preferences, this segment within the market, there was a lot more demand. So Woolies and Coles actually sourced out brands for this or businesses, and Carmen's fit that bill. Now, when they got picked up by Coles and Woolies, there was obviously a huge increase in demand. So they, in turn, had to drastically alter their production process and location to cope with that huge demand. They've done this successfully, and they are still being sold in those supermarkets today. Now, the operations function cannot operate in isolation of the other key functions, and it cannot operate in isolation of what its customers want, so what a customer wants from the business. In this regard, visibility refers to building a relationship with the customer. It not only builds loyalty, it enables it to improve its operations. So an example of this is questionnaires or surveys. Now, a case study of this was the Sydney Morning Herald, where they've actually gone from a free view website to now it's a pay-per-view, and they've gone into a big process of surveying their customers to find out what they wanted. Now, questions were posed to investigate the times and types of access to their digital information, and the results they used were used to tailor the appropriate packages to suit the customers and boost SMH's profits. SMH is Sydney Morning Herald. Now, if you operate in isolation of the customer, you won't know what their needs or habits are, and you won't be able to adapt. So customization in this regard is very important, even actually as a standardized approach as well. Now, organizing within operations is one of the key parts of trying to minimize expenses, increase productivity, increase efficiency. So when managers look at this, they look at sequencing and scheduling. Now, businesses need to make sure that when they transform their inputs, they are profitable for the business. So managers especially must allocate resources efficiently and make sure that the least amount of waste occurs. There are a number of ways that managers actually look at doing this, and sequencing and scheduling is all part of that. It will consider what products should be made, and it'll enable management to determine the layout of the business, what inputs are needed, and when. As you can see, if sequencing and scheduling is not planned, it will mean that resources may not be available as needed. Some inputs and employees are available when they are not needed, or they're getting in the way and causing confusion. So this will be costly for the business and ultimately reduce profits. Now, managers do this in a number of ways where they can sequence and schedule. One of the most popular ways of doing this is the use of what is called a Gantt chart. It is a planning tool. It's a type of bar chart that illustrates the start and finish dates of a project. It can be seen that it's broken down into tasks. It gives the time frame for each task. It overlays where they're going to be coming in contact with other parts of the planning process. And it allows managements to see what jobs need doing, when they need doing, and how they are overlapping. So you'll see an example here. It's the activity for the opening of Mega Music Proprietary Limited. It starts from registering the business through to the final stage, which is starting trading. Now, what you'll see here is the sequence of events or the sequence of tasks that need to be fulfilled in descending order until the start of trading date. Now, it also shows timeframes of each of those. This works very well on a number of levels. However, it does have some drawbacks. And when we look at our next type of planning tool that we'll use, you'll see how this maybe isn't as useful as other type of charts. So the second project analysis tool that we're talking about is actually that of a critical path analysis. And it allows the management to map out the production process, look at the longest possible time frame the project could take. Basically, what a critical path analysis looks at is what needs to be completed within a process in order to complete the final objective. The shortest time between those is then analyzed, and where there is overlap, so if there is a critical point or a critical task that needs to complete in, majority of the business will be working at completing that because no other sections can move on until that is completed. However, if there is some downtime, maybe where it takes a long time for one particular task, other areas of the business can be put into achieving other tasks that are not critical to the finish. So it's the shorter length of time it takes to complete all tasks. As I said, you'll see that some tasks can be performed simultaneously. For example, in this one, painting and testing components. So the critical path is the painting of the components needs to take place before final assembly. However, at the same time, testing components can be done. It is non-critical, which means it doesn't have to be done before the final dispatch, before final assembly. However, it does occur at that same time because there is that time frame there. Because each activity on the schedule must be completed to make the final product, the critical path is actually the shortest path through the process, having completed all tasks. Now, in the past, many production techniques were very labor-orientated and they were repetitive. An example of this is obviously the Ford Motor Company when Henry Ford first started that. However, the development of new technologies, many products are designed and assembled using computer-assisted design or manufacturing. Now, as you can see in the photo here, it means that businesses are allowed, they can test, they can design, and they can, in a lot less time than what there used to be, and they can relocate dangerous or repetitive tasks away from employees. This is closely linked to the HR function. It's allowed more efficient production processes. While new technology may be expensive in the short run, in the long run, it usually results in more cost-effective practices and therefore higher profits. Now, task design refers to planning the flow of activities that have to be done to complete a task. If the flow of activities are organized into a logical sequence, employees will be able to successfully perform and complete their allocated task. Task design usually involves the following steps. Managers will need to define what needs to be done, who needs to do it, will break down the task into specific skills and duties, and then allocate time, elements, and difficulty levels to the task. This will go in close connection with the previous two planning tools as well, in order that management can keep ahead and understand where the project is up to. An important part of operations transformation is actually a process layout. Now, this will affect how efficiently a business is able to transform the inputs into an output, so essentially minimizing expenses as well. Technology and task design will impact on this layout. So if the task design, like in the previous slide, has been done first, the technological requirements are outlined, then the process layout can be adapted. So, for example, the requirements to access to electricity, cooling, water, etc. If technology is needed to be used by different employees at different times, task design will identify this so that clashes do not occur. So at all times, the process layout is emphasizing a smooth flow of production and OH&S. You'll see below an example of this is an old-fashioned task design and process layout. This was in Ford, Henry Ford, and where people manned every part of that production process. That was repetitive. HR-wise, it's hard to keep an employee motivated if they're doing the same thing over and over again. It would have been classical scientific design of job. However, nowadays, the modern process layout, the absence of people. In modern organization, employees are not doing the repetitive work of an assembly line. So this is one thing that has changed over time. Now, monitoring, controlling, and improvement. Now, monitoring refers to the collecting and analyzing of information so that processes can be improved. Businesses will put into place key performance indicators, or KPIs, so they can actually see if targets are being met. So, for example, a manufacturing business or a retail business may have expectations of selling a certain number of products. Monitoring these indicators will allow the business to see if these targets are being met. If they are not being met, then the reasons can be analysed so corrective action can be taken. As you'll see here, managers need to decide what to measure, how the data is going to be collected, the analysis of the data, how they're going to report results, and corrective action being taken. Now, control is the process of comparing the predetermined target against the actual result and assessing what action is needed to correct a shortfall. In this regard, an example is Alcoa in the United States. They had a lot of accidents, so WHS or OHS, they had a lot of accidents within their workplace. However, management wasn't giving them a way to report these accidents. Therefore, staff turnover was high, productivity was down, people were taking more sick days, there were more accidents on the job. Therefore, the ramifications were huge. When the business Alcoa actually analysed this and figured out why it was happening, they realised it was because there was no means of collecting and analysing the information. So they put in a whole different process whereby employees could pass on information about safety. If there was an accident, management had to fully investigate it, and then changes were made, especially if it was reoccurring. So this in turn had a big impact on the profitability of that business, and their share price jumped significantly because employees felt better, they were more motivated, they felt, more or better cared or looked after by the business. Their efficiency increased, their productivity increased. It had huge ramifications throughout. So as you'll see, thank you. You've seen another part of my home today that you haven't seen before. There's my favourite fern just in the background there. Kniche out. Have fun.